Another new instrument that's new for Machine 2.3 users inside of Complete Select is Retro Machines Mark II. This is a great library, a Kontakt library, if you were unaware, that is basically multi-sampled, articulately sampled vintage analog synthesizers. So, you know, analog synths are all the rage again. Even companies are remaking the classics and kind of reselling them. And the beautiful thing about software samplers is that you could always have and take your analog synths with you. You know, maybe it wasn't exactly the same thing, but it's darn near the same thing. All these all these bands, when they would go on tour and they would have to recreate, those classic sounds back in the 80s and 90s, they'd be taking hardware samplers and just kind of playing their synths that have been multi-sampled in. So that's what this Retro Machines library is. And it's got some really fantastic sounds. There's a huge array of the classic kind of analog synths from yesteryear. I mean, you have an Oberheim SEM 4-voice here. This is fantastic. You have things like, again, the Mini Moog, which we were just showing off in Monarch, or Sequential Circuits Pro 1, Roland Super Jupiter. Fantastic stuff. So definitely get in here and check them out. In this little sketch, I used it as kind of an arpeggiator. So it's just kind of filling a nice little role. It's not standing out too much. One thing I want to point out about what it's doing here is the way I'm playing this is using one of the chord sets, the minor 5 chord set. And so what happens is, if you weren't aware, you can play the chord sets and yet use the arpeggiator. So I have it in chord set. You're not hearing a chord because I have this set to be monophonic, like it truly is on a Pro 1. If I hit note repeat on my machine, then I can play it as an arpeggiator, but the arpeggiator will still play through that chord set. So whatever those notes are in the chord set, they will be triggered with the arpeggiator. So very flexible in that way. Now, if you're just looking at this Retro Machines, again, if you don't own the complete bundles, then you will have what's called the Kontakt player, which is just basically going to allow you to play back these sounds with a lot of variations that you can work with, though. All the sounds are smartly laid out inside of Machine. There's only 4 pages to worry about. And then there's some cool stuff like the sound variations. So you have a lot of presets, but then you have many different variations inside of these presets. So a couple different ways this works. You can actually click on the sound variation altogether, 1 through 8. Or once you have one selected, you kind of have the general characteristics of where all these parameters are set. And then you can morph into the general characteristics of where the other sound variations are set without ever leaving the one you started with, which can be kind of cool. So if I stay on 5, I like the 5, but I want to kind of get a taste of what 1 was doing. You can just kind of ride over there. Now you can actually control this from your mod wheel too, which will give you a nice hands off. By default, I believe you have to come to the settings here. I believe this is actually set, the mod wheel is set to mod amount. So you may want to switch it to morph slider to be able to have a little more playability, if you will. That's one thing to know. I just want to also touch in on another preset here. This one's called Albedo Morph, and I'm using that same chord set, minor 5th. And that's just a gorgeous tone. Now, but what's happening here is, though, it's playing a lot more chords than the chord set offers. And if you'll notice, there's a little arp and chord thing here. And on the second page, you can actually add an arpeggiator from Kontakt onto these analog samples. So you're kind of getting extra bang for your buck. If the Mini Moog did not have an arpeggiator, which it didn't, Kontakt kind of, brute forces one on top of it, or makes it chordal. So you can actually have 4 notes playing at different intervals. And so what's cool about this is I'm using a chord set from Machine, and then kind of stacking on top of it a chord set inside of Retro Machines. Very nice. The other thing I want to point out is that if you do own Kontakt, the full version, you can actually go under the hood and see some extra things about what's going on in here. Now, what you might want to do is actually come to the mapping editor. And for instance, this preset, Albedo Morph, I don't even know what that means. So when I came under the hood, I could see that all the samples were named MKS/80. And this would lead you to believe that this is a Roland MKS-80, which was the Super Jupiter. It was essentially a Jupiter 6 or a Jupiter 8 without keys. It was a box, you know, it was like a rack-mounted unit that was still analog, but much cheaper because of the lack of keys. So that's what this was sampled from. So on some of these presets where you might not know what they mean or what they are, you know, you can actually go under the hood and just kind of see what they are. And then if you also come to the wave editor, you can actually hear what it is before Kontakt imparts all this extra modulation on top of it. Here's the pure waveform, which is just gorgeous. But actually Kontakt's got it doing all this other stuff that makes it sound like this. You know, there's filters and there's all this extra stuff going on, but really a fantastic library. You're getting a whole lot of bang for your buck. You're getting all these classic things that if you had bought all these synthesizers, you know, you'd be in debt. So check them out and work with them. They're really pretty fantastic.